participating in clinical trials. The presentation will be approximately 25 to 30 minutes, and then we'll open up the session to your question with our guests who have participated in clinical trials themselves. JDRF is a global leader in working towards an end to type 1 diabetes through both research and also funding and advocacy. JDRF also supports people and families in the T1D community from the time of diagnosis by helping those living with T1D to have better, healthier, and safer lives while we work to find cures. The education series offers information on a new topic every other month. In May, we will be holding a session on type 1 diabetes and mental health, and we hope you'll be able to join us for that one as well. We also host a virtual connection series on the fourth Wednesday of every month. This is an unstructured opportunity to connect with others with no formal programming. And to learn more and sign up for the next connection series, which will be taking place on April 26th at 12 p.m. Pacific time and 7 p.m. Eastern time, please visit our website at jdrf.ca. So just a few housekeeping and technical items. We are a big group, so to minimize noise, just would remind you to please keep your microphones on mute. And just a reminder that we are recording this and we post it to our YouTube channel. So if you don't want to be a TV star, please turn your camera off and we will not have you on the video. There's a raise hand button. So if you need clarification during the presentation, you're welcome to raise your hand, but we will have the chat function going the entire presentation, and we encourage any questions to be commented on in the chat. And we'll try to get to all of them time permitted or answer them as we go. And we will share the recording with you in an email tomorrow. And we'll also put a JDRF contact email address in the chat function where you can email us with any follow-up questions you might have following the presentation. So we're very excited to talk to you about clinical trials tonight. Hope you can help me welcome Laura Green, PhD, National Manager of Research Programs and Communications at JDRF Canada, who will lead with an overview of clinical trials. And we will have Adam Ruddick and Caden Ellis, who will speak to their own experiences with clinical trials, and all are available to answer your questions. So on that note, I will turn it over to Laura to begin the presentation.
Thank you. So great to see everyone. And as Ruth said, just back here, there we go. So I'm going to give a short presentation and then we'll hear from Adam and hopefully Caden, although not sure if he's able to make it tonight. And then we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion, but please feel free to put any questions in the chat. We also have Sarah Linklater on with us, who is the Chief Scientific Officer for JDRF Canada, and she can help answer questions in the chat as we go. So jumping right into it, as most of you know, JDRF is a global leader in T1D research, where our vision is to have a world without type 1 diabetes. And what I'd like to really draw your attention to is that we currently have 375 active research grants ongoing around the world and over 70 clinical trials around the world. So clinical trials are a type of research that studies new tests and treatments and evaluates their effects on human health outcomes. This is a definition from the World Health Organization. Any treatment that is being developed for eventual use in a clinic must first be tested in a clinical trial. So this could include drugs, devices, virtual care platforms, behavioral therapy, education, and more. I think in most cases, people think of, when they think of clinical trial, they think of drugs and surgeries, but it encompasses so many things. One example is the evolution of the insulin pump. So every new iteration of the insulin pump has undergone a clinical trial to bring it to market. So that's thousands of participants over the years that have been a part of insulin pumps to get to the point that we're at now. Clinical trials need a diversity of participants. In fact, clinical trials do best when they have a very diverse group of participants. So there are clinical trials for everybody from children to elderly, anywhere from usually stage 2 to long duration T1D, people with and without complications, whether or not you're using a pump or a CGM or not, et cetera, et cetera. The list is endless. So most likely if you're interested in participating in a clinical trial, you can probably find something that you're eligible for. This slide is a lot, but I just kind of want to walk you through the timeline of how clinical trials start and end. So it seems like it's a long time from when you first maybe hear about something until we often hear about FDA approval or Health Canada approval. And there's a reason for that. There's a lot of research that goes into everything behind the scenes before it even becomes a clinical trial. So first we have what's called preclinical trials, and this is all the research that's happening behind the scenes to find, the drugs, the devices, et cetera, develop these. And these are typically just looking at the safety of whatever the intervention is, and oftentimes these are tested in animal models. And just as a point to note that animal model studies are highly controlled by both ethics and animal care committees. And these typically can last anywhere from 2 to 6 years, maybe even longer. From going from preclinical trial where the research team has found something that they think will work and they want to apply it to clinical trials, they have to go through Health Canada approval. And this approval is a clinical trials application. So they have to demonstrate that there are more benefits than risks, and that they have determined that it will be safe enough to go to clinical trial. We often call this point the valley of death because it takes a lot of money to go from preclinical to clinical trials. And so this is a point where JDRF often steps in with funding to help get over this hurdle. So Health Canada approval has already happened before it goes to clinical trial. It's already gone through a lot of strict regulation processes. However, phase 1 is still a proof of concept. So this is number 1, looking at safety again in humans, and then looking at the expected response and any side effects. And so these are typically done with a small number of participants, anywhere from 20 to 100 participants. And typically these take anywhere from 6 months to a year, maybe a little bit more. If phase 1 is successful in that it has shown the expected response, there have been minimal side effects, it's proven to be safe, only then will it move to phase 2, which is to determine the efficacy. So although there's the expected response, is the response really doing better than anything that exists? And it's also to look at dosage and frequency. So, when you're told that you've got to take a certain drug a certain number of times, et cetera, in this stage of in phase 2, often we're looking at different dosages, different frequencies. These are some more participants, and they usually take a slightly longer time because it's more participants. The last one is the pivotal phase. That's phase 3, and that's where it's compared. It's basically just to look at efficacy. Okay. So it's compared to an existing treatment, if one exists, to make sure that it is better than or as good as an existing treatment. So really, again, is the benefit outweighing the risk? And this has to be a large number of participants, which means it takes a number of years to do this. And they need to have enough information that they can apply to Health Canada and say that this drug, device, therapy, et cetera, should go to market. So that's kind of the timeline of a clinical trial. And so you can see here why it does take so long for something to go to market. So not all devices, drugs, interventions make it through this timeline. And over 80% of these are delayed due to low participation. And when they don't have enough participants and it's costing more and more money to run these trials, oftentimes these trials fail. So the number one reason that people don't participate is because they don't know about the opportunity. But also there are a lot of misconceptions. So hopefully what we're going to talk about here is how can you find out about clinical trials and what is it like to participate? And we'll kind of go through some of those misconceptions. So talking specifically about Canada, Canada is actually the G7 leader in clinical trial productivity. So we're recognized for our quality and expertise of research clinicians. We have an extensive network of academic institutions, including 17 medical schools, 40 healthcare organizations, and over 15,000 researchers. And all major global pharmaceutical companies conduct a portion of their clinical trials in Canada. So that really goes to show that we're a leader in clinical trials. As of a couple days ago, there were 54 active trials ongoing in T1D. So that means that these are trials that are recruiting or recently finished recruiting people. JDRF is directly funding 13 of these ongoing trials. So we have 45 intervention trials, and an intervention trial means that the trial is actively giving something to participant. So it might be a drug, a surgery, they are giving them an exercise program, a mental health app for a number of months, for example. Observational trials, there's fewer of these. So for T1D, there's only 9. This is when they're just recording something from the participant without giving them anything. So in an observational trial, they're just recording data from you. You're not being given any kind of intervention. So some examples of these, you've probably heard of TrialNet, which is familial screening for T1D. The Better Registry, which we encourage everybody to be a part of. So again, it's just asking for data from you. The Concept study is monitoring children who were born to mothers with T1D. And then a lot of other observational trials are just following up on drugs. So for example, teplizumab, even though it's now approved, there are a number of observational trials ongoing to continue following those people for a number of years. So these are just an example of 4 of the T1D trials that we have underway. I talked about the Better Registry, and that's now across Canada. It started in Quebec, and it's expanded to across Canada. And again, we encourage everybody to sign up. If you're 14 or older, you sign up for yourself. If it's your child that has T1D and is 13 or younger, then the parent signs up. The ustekinumab trials is a disease-modifying therapy. So it's for those who are newly diagnosed, and it's looking at slowing the disease progression and protecting beta cells. I've highlighted here the TADS study. So that's Dr. Mary-Eve Robinson in Ottawa, and it's looking at mindful self-compassion program in youth. We also have the ATTEMPT study, and that's Dr. Mahmood at Sick Kids. And this is looking at glycemic control and kidney and heart complications risk, again, in youth. So these are just some examples of the trials we have ongoing, and I believe that Ruth just put the link to our website in the chat so you can see more of those. So we have found that less than 1% of physicians refer to clinical trials. And the main reason is they're already very busy, and to keep on top of ongoing clinical trials is difficult. So they typically are not referring their patients. And so unfortunately, the onus is kind of on the patient to find clinical trials. So our website is a great place. We've actually just revamped our website, so please visit it and take a look. We also, if you get the JDRF Impact newsletter, we will have a clinical trial spotlight in there from now on. Clinicaltrials.gov is an international registry. It is not the most user-friendly, but it does have that information there. So when you go to clinicaltrials.gov, if you put in that you're looking for type 1 diabetes in Canada, you can find a list of trials. Our team is also happy to help anybody navigate clinicaltrials.gov at any point if you wanted to reach out to us. So like I said, research@jdrf.ca, please reach out and we can help you with that. And then on our website, we also have something called the Antidote tool, and that is a clinical trials matching. So you put in a little bit of information and it will help match you. It does not filter by country. So if you live in like a border town, like I'm in Southern Ontario, I often get a lot of New York trials if I try to put that in. So by all means, it's a good tool, but it's not always the most specific. So we just want to talk about what it's like to be a participant before we actually hear from our participants. So these are some common concerns that we have heard from people about being a participant. So all of these very common, totally valid, and we're going to hopefully go through and kind of discuss some of these. So any participation in a clinical trial, including being in a placebo group, will help contribute to a cure or advancement in T1D research and resources. So your participation in clinical trials is invaluable. Clinical trials that do have placebo groups are often double-blinded. So that means that neither you nor the doctors or research team know if you're getting the intervention or placebo. So for example, if it's a drug, all of the drugs, placebo and the active drug, will look exactly the same and nobody knows what you're getting. This means that everybody receives equal treatment so that there's no impact of that on the trial. If you are in a placebo group, keep in mind that the placebo effect is very valid and may result in an improvement in symptoms. As well, the placebo group benefits from the added medical care that everyone receives. So you get a lot of medical care when you're in a clinical trial, especially one that's more invasive, like giving a drug or a procedure. And so you get that added benefit of lots of medical care. Continuing on with placebos, we just want to talk about the different types of placebos because I think everybody thinks of a placebo as being a sugar pill, basically. So that is one option. So that's number one, intervention versus nothing, where nothing is a sugar pill. So something like teplizumab, Tzield, or the other trial I mentioned, ustekinumab, there's no drug to compare it to because there's nothing else out there. So those trials are the active drug versus a sugar pill. Number two is intervention versus standard of care. And this is actually more common. So that is where a new treatment or intervention is compared to an already existing treatment. So for example, a new insulin in a clinical trial, obviously the placebo group can't be no insulin. So it's compared to an already existing insulin where they know the effects. This also might be a new device compared to an older device, or a new mental health program compared to an existing mental health program. And lastly, there's something called the crossover or waitlist design. And this is where everybody gets the treatment. It's just a matter of when you get the treatment. So one group will get the intervention first, maybe for 6 months, and the other group is followed for that period of time but doesn't get the intervention. And then after that time period, they switch places. And the group that was waitlisted then gets the intervention. So this way, everybody gets the intervention, but they can see based on the two different time periods what the intervention is doing versus the other group. It's also good to note that if you are in a placebo group, it's possible that after the trial ends, you can continue that treatment or be given the treatment. So for the teplizumab studies, for example, the Tzield studies, the people that were in the placebo groups, when the trial ended and it went to FDA approval, those people were offered the drug for almost as a thank you to participating in the study. So another concern is compensation, not living near a major city or a major hospital. But a lot of clinical trials have a large travel budget that will help cover participant expenses. It could be travel to the site. Sometimes for large studies, they might even fly you across the country. It could be parking costs, food, time, compensation, for example. So don't let not being close to a study prohibit you from reaching out to the organizers. Of course, side effects are a common concern, and side effects are possible for all clinical trials. It's, in fact, one of the reasons that clinical trials are conducted is to find out what side effects there may be. So any anticipated side effects will be detailed very, very well detailed in an informed consent document prior to beginning the study. So you'll be able to read about any anticipated side effects. And then as side effects happen during the study, if they do happen, they are recorded and managed very closely by a dedicated safety committee. So don't think that if you have a side effect, you'll just kind of be left on your own to deal with it. A lot of people are concerned that if they have good diabetes management, they're concerned that being part of a clinical trial will impact that diabetes management. However, most participants show a benefit just from being enrolled in a trial because they are receiving added medical care. This is especially true for people who don't live near a major city and don't have access to an endocrinologist very often, or they don't get appointments very frequently, for example. Being part of the clinical trial gives you that added medical care. Lastly, there's always a concern, that you may not be treated equally in a clinical trial. And all participants in trials are supposed to receive equal care regardless of age, sex, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, diabetes management practices, etc. Study teams are trained to keep the treatment of participants as equal as possible. Obviously, one of the reasons for this is that it's most ethical to treat everybody as fairly as possible, but also because treating one person differently than another could impact the results. And they need to make sure that this doesn't impact the results, only the intervention is impacting the results. So although there is a long history of clinical trials being maybe not as equal as they should, it has been a huge push, especially in Canada with our Canadian ethics system, to look towards fair and equal treatment of all participants. And lastly, we always want to make sure that people know you can choose to leave a clinical trial at any time. If you go in, sign the informed consent, and want to, rip it up and leave, that's fair. If you're 90% of the way through and you want to call it quits, that's fair. There will always be details in an informed consent document telling you about all the ways that you can leave the trial. So you're never solidified into a trial. If it's not working for you for whatever reason, or even, if you don't have enough time to commit going further, you can always leave at any time. So don't let that hold you back from going into, see what the informed consent says, talk to the study team, for example. They're used to people coming in, getting all the information, and then saying, never mind, I can't commit right now. And that's totally fine. So thank you so much for listening to this. I hope that it was informative and that you learned something new. If you've got any questions, concerns, feedback, we're happy to hear all of it. We can help you find trials. I know there's a lot of information out there. It's hard to figure out what there is. We can give you more information. So research at jdrf.ca. We also have our newly updated website, and there's a button there to say participate in research and see our the ongoing trials that JDRF funds. And yeah, we're always happy to help. So thank you very much. And I'm going to pass it back to Ruth.
Thank you so much for that. I see we have some questions going in the chat. I'm going to just hold on to them unless we get a response in the chat until we come to the Q&A section, because I want to introduce Adam Ruddick and Kaden Ellis, who have both participated in clinical trials themselves and are here to share their personal experience with you, to give you a little bit more information about what it's actually like to be in one. So I think, Adam, we'll start with you. You're comfortable. Adam also just did our French call, so he's been speaking in both languages tonight, and we're very grateful to him, and I'll let him go first.
Thank you, Ruth. Yeah, I'm like all warmed up now from that. So thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I noticed a lot of names in the chat that I know. So hello to everyone. And those who I don't know, hello. Thanks for joining this. I can't tell you how important research is and how important our participation is. Of course, you have to be comfortable with what you're doing. That's a big topic or big theme of basically the study that I participated in. So Ruth, are you good if I start with maybe an intro to that? Yeah. Okay. I see you nodding your head.
Yes, please.
Awesome.
Sorry, I muted myself. Yes,
No,
please go ahead.
that's okay. So I participated in the French one. I said 2019. That's not true. It was actually 2017. I re-looked at my emails. 2017 with a study that was testing the effects basically of insulin with the use of a drug called or hormone actually called pramlintide. And to see if you can get better blood sugar control if both of them were being used at the same time. And I think down the line, there was a potential hypothesis that they can both be kind of fused together into one solution, which is kind of interesting. Just so everyone knows, pramlintide is available on the market already. It's typically used in type 2 diabetics. And its key role is to just delay gastric emptying. So basically delays the movement of food through your stomach, which is supposed to prevent spikes, blood sugar spikes post-meal. First thing I did when I was approached by this is I did my own research, and I say that very lightly, but I did it just to make sure the drug was safe and was used on other people before. That was my green light to say, okay, this is kind of interesting. So I accepted it. There was a pre-study interview where they did some blood work. They just made sure you were kind of a somewhat controlled type 1 diabetic. Your blood sugars weren't all over the place. And that if there are any other medical issues, they would know. But at the same time, they took the time to explain the study, go through any authorizations that needed to be signed off on, any risks associated with it, which there were very few in this one. I mean, it's just the effects of the drug pramlintide, which I'll go into a little bit later, which are very, very minor, if any at all. So in that first interview, they gave me a sheet and they said, here are all the meals you could choose from for these 2 inpatient stays. So the study was 2 weeks outpatient. So I'm on my own at home. And believe it or not, I had to have 2 insulin pumps. So my regular one, and they gave me another insulin pump, which had pramlintide in it. So basically, I'm walking around now at home with 2 pumps, going to the gym with 2 pumps, going to work with 2 pumps. That was a little inconvenient, I must say. I'm sure people who are on pumps can agree with me on that. But that was step 1 of it. And the reason for that is that they wanted to calibrate my blood sugar. They basically wanted to put me in the most optimal state before the 48-hour inpatient, where I was going to go to the hospital, the Glen in Montreal, and stay overnight for 2 nights for a total of 3 days. Okay. That 2-week period, I spoke with the nurses of the study, and the team was awesome. They were very, very nice. I spoke with the nurses and the head doctor, Dr. Ahmad Haidar. Spoke with them, I think, every 2 or 3 days, and they'd go through my numbers and they'd recalibrate to make sure it was just as perfect. It was almost like a free consultation in some ways. It was kind of awesome, but they were doing it with the pramlintide too, which I wasn't touching. Once I got to the actual inpatient, so in the actual hospital itself, it was basically me being monitored for the 24 hours. And what they were doing was they were taking blood samples. And when I say blood samples, I mean just like your regular, you have your endo appointment and you're taking the 2-3 vials of blood that they do. They were doing that every half an hour. So a little bit invasive, but you had an IV in you and they would just literally attach and detach as they needed. It stayed in you for as long as it possibly could until they had to move it to a different arm. They did this for 30 minutes and then they would increase that time, or decrease, I should say, as you started to eat your meals. So as it got closer to mealtime, and at mealtime, they were actually taking it every 10 minutes. Okay. Throughout it, the patient was not able to see their blood sugar. So I'll talk about this later shortly because I think I'm going to be asked about some fears. There was you didn't have control over it. Someone else is controlling it for you. So I didn't know what my blood sugar was throughout those 48 hours, but it kind of was like a little vacation. Let's be real. So that was the inpatient part of it. That lasted the 2 days. And by the way, they kept taking blood overnight. So even when I was sleeping, I had to have the arm kind of out and ready, and they would go in the middle of the night and they would take it every half an hour. Aside from that, when they gave the food menus I told you guys about earlier at the beginning, they did that because I had to select exactly what I was going to eat for the meals, which they provided, for the 2 days, and it had to be at the exact time. Literally, the nurses were on their watches looking and being okay, like start eating. It was like a race. And it had to be the same amount of carbohydrates for each meal. The last thing I'll point out is that it also was the same for exercise. So imagine I'm in a room, there's nothing really to do. I had my laptop, I had some books, like you couldn't do anything but just kind of sit around. However, they scheduled one indoor cycling session where again, they were monitoring and they were actually sitting there watching your blood sugar and like with a Dexcom. It was kind of cool. Whereas there was a couple times where I was like, hey, I'm really bored. Can I just go for a walk? Which is totally fine. But I had to do it at the exact same time for the exact same length the next day. Okay, so everything was a copy paste from day 1 to day 2. That's pretty much the gist of it. That's what the study was. It wasn't so invasive. I didn't find it so invasive, but that was the gist of it. So I'll start with that, and then I can kick it back to Ruth or anyone else.
Thank you. And Caden, are you still with us? I know you were on earlier.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, but you want to turn your camera on?
Sure, I think it is. I'm super technically illiterate, so if people can't
Oh,
see
there we go. Okay. There you go. Okay, so if you wanted to share your experience as well.
Sure. Yeah, mine doesn't sound near as intense as Adam's is. Mine was pretty easy going. It was tough. I was in the ustekinumab trial in Vancouver. So I found out about it just through a mutual contact while I was in the hospital. I was diagnosed at 25, which was kind of completely out of the blue for me, and just started reaching out to people because my first thought was, oh, I'll hop on a clinical trial. I had just happened to see a couple months before someone I knew had posted about Dr. Shapiro's work, which just for some reason stuck in my head. I didn't know anyone really with diabetes and didn't have it in my family, but for some reason it stuck because I remember thinking it was pretty interesting that there was research going on. So I reached out, got passed off to Vancouver and Dr. Elliott's trial with ustekinumab. And it was a real, I would say, whirlwind for me because I didn't have the traditional maybe clinical trial experience that some did. I was brand new to diabetes myself. I didn't know what my blood sugars were normally. I didn't know what my carb ratios were. Like I was learning diabetes at the same time as enrolling into a study. But the study I was in was fantastic. So anyone who's worried at all I can say for that is they completely put my mind at ease. So it started with a phone call. They explained everything to me, technical, like super sciencey words that I didn't understand or that were way over my head. They would stop and explain it in regular people terms, make sure I understood, and then they would keep going. At the very end, like they were discussing, you always have the option to back out. So even when all the paperwork was sent, even when I'd signed and sent it in, every single time there was always the opportunity to back out if I wanted to. So for me, what they were looking at was newly diagnosed type 1s to see if ustekinumab could essentially prolong the honeymoon period. And the idea was how long could it be prolonged for? So it was a double-blind study. I was involved in it. It was about 18 months, I believe. I just finished here in September, so not too long ago. But it was great. Like I said, they completely informed me once I'd made the decision to enroll in the study. I'm from the Calgary area, just south of Calgary. So they arranged my travel. They covered it all to get to Vancouver, to do my trial screenings, to make sure that I qualified. Once that was done, they asked me if I was still okay with it, made sure that I was comfortable, understood. And for me, my biggest thing was being recently diagnosed and not really understanding how diabetes worked even to begin with. They were there pretty much 24/7. I'd be sending emails at 11 o'clock at night, and sometimes I would get an email back. They were fantastic about keeping me in the loop. And then even explaining all the side effects, the percentages of like the likely outcomes of some side effects they'd experienced. And then on top of that, they were fantastic about connecting with my endocrinologist. So anything that they were able to share that wasn't confidential to the trial, they would send to her so that my entire diabetes team was in the loop at all times, monitoring my blood sugars, monitoring everything just to make sure that I was okay. And then the other thing that I would say that was like massive about the trial I did is there's obviously the research side where, you know, they have to collect their data and you go in, and for me, it was a lot of blood work, similar to Adam. Some days it was a mixed tolerance meal test where you would consume, for me, it was like an Ensure. So they would measure exactly how much carbs, exactly how much sugar, everything like that in, and they would watch my blood sugar and do draws every 20 to 30 minutes. So it was all pretty rigorous that way. And then at the end, I would get one subcutaneous shot, and this happened every 2 months. And then that just continued. But outside of the science stuff, they were fantastic about like the human side of things. So I would get a stipend for my train to get from the airport to downtown Vancouver where their office was, and then back to the airport, and then also cover kind of a meal for me so I could go grab lunch and stuff. And for me, growing up in the prairies, Vancouver was like the coolest place in the world for me. And they were awesome even about taking things to the human aspect, about recommending places to go eat and places to go see. And, oh, if your flight doesn't leave until, 9 p.m., you could do this, this, and this, and drawing me a map. And so it made me feel like I wasn't just a kind of number in a research trial as a participant, like they actually cared about, my mental well-being, making sure that as much as I was contributing to the study, that I was also getting something out of it myself outside of diabetes and research. So yeah, 18 months, just finished that. And I had a great experience. The trial is ongoing and I keep pushing people towards them. Every time I hear about someone newly diagnosed, even just to find out more information, like we've said, you can always back out if you need to, or if you choose to and you decide that the study's not for you. There's no one forcing you to do it. But I think even just the information you can get from it and the awareness of talking to more people is invaluable.
Thank you. Before I turn to the questions in the chat, I just want to ask a question of Caden and Adam, and I know you both shared your experiences, but at very different times in your diabetes journeys that you both did it. Did you find that it helped you, Caden, adapt to your new normal as somebody with T1D? And Adam, did you find that it actually helped with your glucose control? You're both muted.
I can feel this one, I guess, right off the bat. It helped and it didn't. Then it helped a lot. The problem with me is, like I said, I was still trying to understand diabetes myself and how my body adjusted. So sometimes when things would be happening, I didn't necessarily know if it was just because I now have diabetes and that's how your blood sugar works, or if things were happening because of the interventions being done in the trial. So that was a little bit confusing for me, trying to get a grasp on diabetes and then also understanding that some of the things that were happening may have been a result of the trial. But the group and my endocrinologist were fantastic, working back and forth and kind of trying to keep me updated on saying, well, this is normal and then this might be because of your participation in the trial. So
I can jump in as well, but Caden summarized it pretty well. It didn't do, for me, once the trial ended, it didn't do much else. It didn't affect me in that many ways. But I know from the results of the study and getting a chance to actually, and I was close to the doctor, to be able to see my numbers afterward. That was really cool because it did show an incredible amount of control. But it didn't change much afterward because I went off the hormone anyway. And yeah.
Thank you both. We have quite a few questions in the chat, and I know we've been
I can jump in here, Ruth. So we've been answering a couple as we see. If we haven't answered yours, it's because I think it would be easier to just answer live. I just want to, we've got a question talking about the results of completed clinical trials. How long does it take for results to be shared and applied in the real world after a clinical trial? This is a tough question. So in terms of a place to find results of clinical trials, these are typically, results are always published in a journal article. That being said, a lot of journals are paywalled, meaning you start to read it and then you get the please pay X number. X amount for the subscription, etc. So that's definitely an issue. Most of these trials that are publicly funded do have to become open access, meaning that there is no subscription payment after a certain amount of time. Typically, that's 1 year, or they might be open access right from the beginning. I mentioned the clinicaltrials.gov website, and the benefit of that website is that you can filter by trials that are like actively recruiting or ones that are completed. Like you can filter by a lot of different things. And even once a trial is completed, they have to maintain their status on that clinicaltrials.gov website, including posting the study results there. So again, it's not the most user-friendly, but typically at the bottom of that, when it has results, they will post the links to the journal articles there. And what's often even more helpful is those are often picked up by news sources. And what JDRF tries to do is we try to pick up all these results and turn them into blog posts. That is, like, Ruth does a great job of turning them into helping us turn them into blog posts, putting them out in the Impact newsletter. Our last newsletter shared the results of the Clever study, which was looking at verapamil. So if you ever do see a result that maybe you're curious about, again, we're happy if you just email us and say, I saw this article come out. Either I can't access it, it's too much jargon, like they're written very scientific. Can you help me understand it? We're happy to do that, and I mean, we'd also be grateful for putting us onto it, and we can turn that into, again, a blog post or a newsletter or an email. In terms of how long does it take? So typically once a study is completed, in terms of like the last participant finishing the study, from there to analyze all the data, turn around and publish it, that can sometimes be a year, maybe 2 years. And then during that time, they could also be applying to the FDA or Health Canada for approval. And then it's kind of in Health Canada's hands. And again, the timeline could be anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. There is always, if it's going to be a little bit more groundbreaking, they can be put in priority. So that timeline can be shortened if it's something that really needs to kind of get out there versus, a new device, the next device model isn't always like put in the highest priority sequence necessarily in terms of Health Canada approval. So I hope I answered that question. It was kind of a tricky one, but we're always happy to help out with that. I also see a question from Jessica about, is there a trial you have been on and want to leave? Is that all, or can you sign on to a different one? Assuming I understand the question, if you're in a trial and you decide to leave, that's fine. You could turn around the next day and join another clinical trial. These are separate research teams. There's no necessarily communication between them, and you are in the driver's seat with a clinical trial. So, as Adam said, or Caden, you had to eat a certain amount at a certain time, et cetera. But other than that, you're in the driver's seat. Like, you can say, I don't like this, and sure, see you later, I'm leaving. So it's always up to you what you want to do for that.
See, Adam has his hand up, so.
Yeah, just to add into what Lara was saying, a lot of the trials, I actually think all of them are like this. They're supposed to usually have an honorarium that they're paying you for. Typically, if you do end early, they're still supposed to give you whatever portion you've completed of this. Even if it's 10% of it, they're still supposed to give you the amount that represents 10%. So it's not like you lose out completely if you leave. If it's uncomfortable, you leave, and you're still going to get the portion that you were in the study for. So I'll just add that in too.
Thank you, Adam. I'm actually going to ask maybe Sarah to jump in on a question here about clinical trials on glucose-responsive insulins, because as far as I know, there are not any going on in Canada. Sarah, maybe you can jump in internationally.
Sure, thanks, Lara. JDRF has been investing in glucose-responsive insulins for several years. And just as a bit of background for this, these would be insulins that would be long-acting, and their activity would only kick in as blood sugar went up. So they wouldn't carry this risk of hypoglycemia like the insulins that are used today. so it's kind of a lock and key mechanism where they would become active depending on the level of your glucose. So these have been much more complicated to develop from a drug development perspective than we originally thought. So the pathway to getting them to clinic has been long, but it's still going. So JDRF has a number of projects active internationally, none at the moment in Canada. And there's at least one company that is beginning to test these in early stage clinical trials. I can't remember which one. I think it's Novo Nordisk, but there's a couple of companies actively pursuing this as well. Other novel insulins that are being explored are ultra rapid insulins, so really quick acting insulins that are a little bit more like physiological insulin, and also liver targeted insulins. So those that head straight for the liver, which is the natural target for insulin in the body, rather than it going everywhere and having more of a diluted effect. So trying to get closer to replacing the physiological action of insulin when it occurs naturally. Back to you, Lara.
I see Caden's hand up. Caden, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if this is a glitch on my end. Someone posted in the chat also with the same name and spelling as me, so I don't know if that's just a coincidence. But anyways, they said they'd love to participate, but a year is a long time, and they have a toddler in school. What I would say with that is don't let that stop you from at least getting more information about a clinical trial. The one I was with, they were fantastic about working around my schedule, and like sometimes I would fly in and fly out the same day. It was a long day for me, but if that was the constraint of my schedule that day, they were willing to come in early or stay late to make sure that it worked around my schedule too. So I know school and kids and everything like that can be difficult, but I wouldn't let that deter you from saying that clinical trials aren't for you. It's definitely still worth looking into, and a lot of them are really good about working around your schedule.
I just
sure.
to respond to that, sorry, we seem to be in Teams. Other people have been commenting that like their names are showing up under different people, or I don't know what's going on with Teams. It's not showing for me. I'm seeing all of your questions as they come in under your names. But Kaden, you're not the only person to flag this, so I will send an email to Microsoft tomorrow to let them know. But please keep going in the chat because we see it properly on our end. So please just keep going ahead and dropping your questions in there. Sorry, Laura, if you want to go ahead.
No worries. I was just saying, you know, Caden's trial was a very lengthy one. There are lots of trials that are only, well, Adam, I think yours was only 2 weeks, correct? So there are, yeah.
Yeah, it's again, it's so funny. I kept looking back at the amount email exchanges. It was actually 3 interventions of 48 hours. So no, it actually ended up being, I think about 2 months total in length, total when you consider the weekends. But to Caden's point, it was very flexible. I could choose when I wanted to go in, which weekends, and as long as it was a consecutive 48 hour for those 3 times, that was good.
Yeah, and there are lots of studies too that actually potentially only require 1 in-person visit, or sometimes just your first and your last are in-person visits, and they send you home with something. Trials, typically clinical trials that are looking at exercise programs, different diets, things like that. Again, typically you can do like a first virtual appointment, then they send you with the information to do on your own time for a couple weeks, and then again you report back, etc. So yeah, don't let that deter you from looking into it. There are lots of different types of trials ongoing.
Sloan had a question, Sarah, that I think might be for you as well. And I'm not even sure what this is. Working in a
Yes.
Yes. Count as a super rapid acting insulin.
So FIASP is a rapid acting, but the goal is to work to ultra rapid acting. So even faster, so that if they're in a pump or in a closed loop system, they're acting really, really quickly. So there's no delay between when your body needs the insulin and when the insulin acts. So even faster than the rapid acting insulins that we have today.
There is a question from Manisha about the news about stem cell therapy and islet cell transplant, and how close are we in curing diabetes, which is always the question that comes up. But Sarah, if you wanted to speak a bit about what's going on at the Center of Excellence and with Vertex and CRISPR, perhaps we could
Sure.
talk a bit about that.
We should organize a whole event on this because there's so much to say. This is one of the areas of research where Canada is really, really head and shoulders above most other countries in terms of being a leader. We have so much history in this space, and the largest amount of our research dollars in Canada are spent in the area of cell replacement. So there's a lot of advances being made. There are about 4 companies and many research groups in Canada that are working to advance or test different types of cell replacement therapy products. 2 that you've probably heard a lot about are ViaCyte, which has recently been acquired by the other big company, Vertex. Both of those companies are currently testing stem cell-based therapies in clinical trials. Vertex and the initial ViaCyte trial require immunosuppression, just like an islet transplant. And ViaCyte's also partnered with a company called CRISPR Therapeutics to create a genetically modified stem cell-based product that can evade the immune system. And that is in trials now, and it does not require immunosuppression. So there's still lots of questions. Should we put these cells in a macroencapsulation device? Should we put them in without a device like islets? Where in the body should we put them? How can we be smart and evade the immune system so that we don't need immunosuppression? So even while these trials are ongoing, there's still a lot of tweaks and research questions that need to be addressed. And that's why we continue to fund lots of academic research. So in terms of how close are we already know from the Vertex trials that some people are able to get these treatments and come off insulin for several months or even over a year, I think, the first Vertex trial participant. So that's really, really exciting. But a lot remains to be seen about the long-term effects of these treatments, how they work in a larger number of people, and whether we can eliminate the need for immunosuppression, which is a big factor because the risks of immunosuppression are high. So I think we will see lots of positive news in the near future. How close are we to getting these to market in an affordable way? I think that's a harder question to answer. So I think really exciting, still lots to learn, and keep your eyes on JDRF's news channels. We'll continue to post updates there. And Ruth reminded me, a lot of this is happening at the JDRF Center of Excellence at UBC. Lots of strengths in Canada, including at UBC, and that's a large research initiative that has a number of different research projects focused on cure research, lots of them on the area of cell replacement. One challenge they're working to address there is scaling up the manufacture of stem cell-based beta cells so that we can grow large amounts that would be needed to treat a large number of people. So that's one of the things we're working on. It's just the manufacturing questions now. So that's exciting, and they're making great progress. I'll stop there.
There was a question, Sarah, as well about mRNA as an option for islet cell delivery.
So, yes. So we all know about mRNA now because of how COVID vaccines were created. Another project at the JDRF Center of Excellence at UBC is actually leveraging exactly this technology to try and deliver kind of mRNA cargo into the pancreas to deliver immunomodulatory therapy that might either prevent or slow down the autoimmunity in type 1 diabetes. So short answer is yes, and we are funding projects in this area now to figure out if we can send specific messages right into the pancreas to minimize the autoimmune response that's happening there.
We have about 5 minutes left, so if anyone had any further questions for Adam or Kaden, I would say now is the time to ask them. Anything else related to clinical trials or to research? I'm just going to put the research email in the chat one more time, and you can email us any specific questions. We're happy to answer them that way. Was there anything else that anyone wanted to ask of Adam and Kaden while you still have the opportunity to speak to someone who has participated? No. Just we had one quick
Yeah,
question.
sorry, I did have a question.
Okay.
If I could, thanks. Adam, you mentioned that you were in the study for a short period of time, and I think I heard you say that you actually were doing better when you were on the study, and then they made you stop taking the drug. So I'm wondering about that, because I feel like that would be I don't know, disappointing. Let me use that word. I don't know. So I'm just wondering about how you dealt with that, I suppose I'll say.
Yeah, good question. And I mentioned this actually on the session earlier in the French talk. I did better, but I also said, like, I questioned, is it realistic? Because everything was 2AT. Everything was at the same time, same amount. So in a very controlled environment, rather than, well, I'm just going to decide to go to a bar and have some food and some beer. What's going to happen then, right? So yeah, I think there was a little bit of like, oh, this sucks, I can't use it or can't officially use it. But it was just very promising. So I think that was the biggest piece for me, was just to see that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
I think something to note there too, that was a great question, is that oftentimes people who participate in these trials can sometimes get first access when it comes out. And like I said, same things. People who are in the placebo group can often be offered the treatment as soon as the study is done, as like a thank you for participating. So it can be hard to have something, taken away from you. Same as, if you're in a mental health app, it's typically for a set period of time and then your access goes away. And the reason is because they need to track that long-term follow-up. So although it is hard to have that kind of taken away at the end of the study, there is a purpose to it. Researchers don't really like having to take that away from you, but then they try to, offer it back as soon as possible if it has been effective.
Caden has his hand up.
Sorry, I know we're running out of time, so I'll keep this really quick. But Darren, to your point, me getting the ustekinumab, because my endocrinologist was so heavily involved in keeping up with the trials, she took it upon herself to, with the research information, provide me an off-label prescription to continue taking the drug, because I had achieved insulin independence for 18 months. The problem is it's impossible to find funding. So that's what I'm currently fighting with, because it's an expensive drug. But there is that opportunity, and there is the opportunity after, I guess, depending on who your endocrinologist is and how comfortable they are.
Okay. I think I see that there were some other questions coming in, but we could honestly be here all night, and I don't want to do that to our guests. Please email anything that you want further follow-up on to the research email. We'll be happy to help you and answer anything that might come up after you get off this call and you think about, because a huge focus of what we want to do at JDRF is really promote awareness of clinical trials. As Laura said in the beginning, if we don't have enough participants, it's possible that potential treatments won't be able to reach people like you who need them, because there just isn't the data there to be able to justify bringing it to the market. So we really want to make sure that the research that we're funding that comes from the generous donations supporters of JDRF gets to the hands of the people that can use it the most. So really grateful for everybody who attended tonight. Super thankful to Adam and Caden for coming on and sharing their personal experiences with everybody. Thank you so much to both of you. And thank you, Sarah and Laura, as well, for your expertise. And I hope that you'll all join us in May when we talk about mental health, type 1 diabetes, and the new training program that we've launched, which I also put in the chat, the link if you wanted to take a look there as well. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming, and have a really great night.